Hey folks, it's been a while. I'm broadcasting now from a corner of my classroom, which is where a lot of my work will be going on here for a while during these COVID-19 days. Anyway, I want to get back on track and continue discussing the Odyssey by Homer, specifically the Robert Fagles translation. This particular one is a doozy. I don't know that I can do it complete and total justice by a short video. I'll do what I can, but there's so much that goes on in here and so much is implied in here because it's the Kingdom of the Dead is what the title of it is in this particular translation. And this is when Circe has just told Odysseus that he needs to go into the underworld. He needs to go into the realm of the dead to be able to move forward. And he will hear from the blind prophet Tiresias. He will hear about how things are going to play out when he does return, which will be a nice bit of information for him because he will understand, okay, I will return. This is how it's going to play out when I return, so I will. And one of the things that I want to point out here is the importance of this particular thing. It's called katabasis in the Greek literature, all right, when the hero does delve down into the depths, in this case the underworld, and then emerges again later. Without dying, this character does this. It's not just something that is done in Greek literature. The whole crux of the Christian religion is based on this same type of a thing, where the main character goes into the underworld and then emerges again. Now, the difference is, of course, Odysseus doesn't die, Christ does die. That's how that, those are the differences in those stories, all right? But the idea is the character descends into the underworld, into where people go after they die, and then emerges again later, often with a new sense of purpose, or things change. And we will see that here, and that is, of course, the object of Christianity. Christ died, went down into hell, because as the theology works there, died with everybody's sins, and if you die with sins, you go to hell. There are also similar types of things in Beowulf, which we will read after this, where Beowulf doesn't die and descend into the underworld and then emerge again, nor does he go into a realm of the dead the way Odysseus does, but he dives down under the depths of a certain swamp to then fight a certain beast. I don't want to give anything away until we get there. And then emerges after having done that with a different aura about him and a different, more respect and appreciation and expectations of him after having done that, all right? So this is part of the trajectory of what we see in all kinds of ancient tales, all right? Now, a lot of us, not a lot of us, but a lot of literature that is tinged with some sort of theology, mythology, understanding of, how the world works, dealing with gods, goddesses, or monotheistic religions, it could be a pantheon, it doesn't really matter. But when we're dealing with these things, there is often the idea of what happens when we die. The Iliad was nothing but death and destruction everywhere. And so what happens after we die? That's kind of the whole deal. You could look at the Judeo-Christian views and how those things have changed. If you look at the Old Testament, there was Sheol, where everybody went when they died. All right? It wasn't a polarized view of death. It was like everyone went there. That's what happened, period, good or bad. And then there's later on the idea of Gehenna came in to Christianity, which was actually, a physical location on earth, but used as a metaphor then, to open up the ideas and interpretations for all different sorts of things when it comes to afterlife. We see in the Aeneid, which is written by Virgil, a different understanding. Virgil's underworld, when Aeneas goes into the underworld, his is much darker than Homer writes this underworld for Odysseus. And then it's no surprise then when Dante is going down into hell and touring that, his guide through the layers of hell is Virgil. Okay, so it's almost as if Dante is looking at Virgil saying, you have imprinted upon me these things that are how I now view my fate, if you want to use that term, or how I expect the afterlife to play out, even though, Dante, a Christian looking into these types of things. So there are a lot of ways in which these pieces of literature kind of converge in different ways as far as, the idea of what happens when we die. And so this is one look at it. So let's take a look. Let's get into the text and let's just see how this plays out now. All right. So at the very beginning, now down we came to the ship at water's edge. They're physically traveling to this place where they will enter into, and then, well, not they, Odysseus will enter into the underworld, and then he will commune with spirits. All right. And he will make it absolutely clear that this is something he was allowed to do. He's a special person. I did listen to one person discussing this, and if you remember, this is a story that he is telling to King Alcinous and Nausicaa and that group there, and we know that Odysseus is able to tell a tale. He is clever. He is wily, and so this particular scholar was implying that perhaps this is all BS, and he's telling this to these group of people to be impressive. I don't know that checks out with what has to be part of the hero's journey. All right, but anyway, he goes on to let everybody know, the readers know, or his listeners know, that Circe helped him get where he needed to be. We see in so much of this literature how often women help out. All right, the men are the heroes, but the men could never do anything without the females pushing them in the right direction, literally in this case using the winds to push them in the right direction. All right, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Circe, the awesome nymph with lovely braids who speaks with a human voice, sent us a hardy shipmate, yes, a fresh following wind ruffling up in our wake, bellying out our sail and to drive our blue prow on as we, securing the running gear from stem to stern, sat back while the wind and helmsman kept her true on course. All right, so it is the help of Circe that enables Odysseus to have this experience. All right, now we do see that there is sacrificing and all kinds of rites and rituals that need to take place before Odysseus can enter into this. And of course, to get here, blood needs to be spilled. In this case, it's going to be animal sacrifice. Whereas if you want to, as I mentioned before, the Judeo-Christian idea is that it's blood human sacrifice. All right, and so that's why when you hear Christians speak, Jesus was a sacrifice for our sins. That's the same type of thing as we see here. In this case, it's animal, not human. So let's look about line 25. It says, here at the spot, Perimedes And Eurylochus held the victims, those are the animals, held the victims fast, and I, drawing my sharp sword from beside my hip, dug a trench of about a 4 arms depth and length, and around it poured libations out to all the dead. First with milk and honey, and then with mellow wine, then water, third and last, and sprinkled glistening barley over it all. And time and again I vowed to all the dead, to the drifting, listless spirits of the ghosts, that I once returned to Ithaca, I would slaughter a barren heifer in my halls, the best I had, and load a pyre with treasures. And to Tiresias, alone, apart, I would offer a sleek black ram, the pride of all my herds. Tiresias is the blind prophet who he's hoping to meet with and discuss things with here in the underworld. And once my vows and prayers had invoked the nations of the dead, I took the victims over the trench and I cut their throats, and the dark blood flowed in. And up out of Erebus they came, flocking toward me now, the ghosts of the dead and gone. Okay, it's almost like once he did that, it sort of released this spirit world, and here it's now even coming to him. Brides and unwed youths and old men who had suffered much, and girls with their tender hearts freshly scarred by sorrow, and great armies of battle dead, stabbed by bronze spears, men of war still wrapped in bloody armor, thousands swarming around the trench from each side. Unearthly cries, blanching terror gripped me. All right, he's you know, the brave Odysseus is freaked out by this sight. This is something that is beyond even what he has seen now. It says, I ordered the men at once to flay the sheep that lay before us, killed by my ruthless blade, and burn them both. And then say prayers to the gods, to the almighty God of death and dead, Persephone. All right. Now, you would do yourself, I don't really have time to go into the story of Persephone, but you would do yourself a great deal of service to stop and look at that whole thing with Demeter and Hades and Persephone, to understand the significance of his name dropping this particular character. All right. So you can watch all this and then look into Persephone, or you can just pause this for a second, Google it, and check it out, Persephone and her importance in all this. Something I think is interesting after this, though, is we see Elpanor. If you remember Elpanor from the last, previous books, what happened was he was the guy who got drunk on the rooftop, and when he got drunk on the rooftop, fell asleep, and then rolled off the roof and died. All right. Now we're going to see his we're going to meet up with him again here. All right. But something I do want to point out, this is another, somebody else brought this up, and it's very interesting. I have a Bible here. Acts, the book of Acts, chapter 20, verse 9, the Apostle Paul is speaking. Is that right? Yes. And it says, and there was a young man named Eutychus, okay, sitting on the window, still, sinking into a deep sleep. And as Paul kept on talking, he was overcome by sleep and fell down from the 3rd floor and was picked up dead. All right. So it is interesting that we have this character, drunk, fell asleep, rolled off rooftop to his death. And we have a character in a very similar situation in the book of Acts in the Bible who, listening to somebody speak, fell asleep, fell out the window, and died. But what we find out here specifically in this particular book is that the ghost of Elpanor does need, he has not, Odysseus has not yet gone into the realm of the dead, but here is Elpanor. And Elpanor was not given the proper burial. And I've mentioned this before, that one needed to have a proper burial if that person was not to be a restless spirit going about everywhere. All right. And so he asks Odysseus, make sure that when you go back, you take care of me the way I need to be taken care of, so I can have the proper rites and rituals and cross over like I'm supposed to. He says here, but first the ghost of Elpanor, my companion, came toward me. He had not been buried under the wide ways of earth. Not yet. We'd left his body in Circe's house, unwept, unburied. This other labor pressed us. But I wept to see him now. Pity touched my heart, and I called out a winged word to him there. Elpanor, how did you travel down to the world of darkness? Faster on foot, I see, than in my black ship. Skipping a bit, about line 75, let's say, he says, well, I know when you leave this lodging of the dead that you and your ship will put ashore again at the island of Aea. Then and there, my lord, remember me, I beg you. Don't sail off and desert me, left unwept, unburied. Don't. Or my curse may draw God's fury on your head. No, burn me in full armor, all my harness, heap my mound by the churning gray surf, a man whose luck ran out, so even men to come will learn my story. Perform my rites and plant on my tomb that oar I swung with the mates when I rode among the living. All right, so do these things for me so that I might have the proper burial and be able to settle. All right. So Odysseus does go into the underworld here, and he meets up with all these characters. And it's interesting, one of the first ones that he runs into is his own mom, who he didn't even know was dead. This is the way he finds out his mom died. I mean, what a way to learn this, all right? We see this about line 95. It says, but look, the ghost of my mother came, my mother dead and gone now. Anticlea, daughter of the great heart Autolycus, whom I had left alive when I sailed for sacred Troy. I broke into tears to see her here, but filled with pity, even throbbing with grief, I would not let her ghost approach the blood until I questioned Tiresias myself. Okay, and so he tries to speak to his mom. His mom will speak back. He says, "What's going on?" He says, "Your mom needs to, need to drink the blood and blah blah blah." Now he speaks to, is able to speak to his mom. But before he is able to speak to his mom, he gets some bit of information, important information, from Tiresias, the blind prophet who's there, okay? I'm going to start reading about line, let's say, 113. It says that God will make it hard for you, I know. You will never escape the one who shakes the earth. That's Poseidon. Quaking with anger at you still enraged because you blinded the Cyclops, his dear son. Even so, you and your crew may still reach home, suffering all the way. If you only have the power to curb their wild desire and curb your own, what's more, from the day your good trim vessels first puts in at Thrinacia Island, flees the cruel blue sea. There you will find them grazing herds and fat flocks, the cattle of Helios, god of the sun, who sees all, hears all things, leaves the beasts unharmed. Okay, so he goes on a couple lines there to say, harm them in any way, these beasts, these cattle of the sun, and I can see it now. All right, so if you don't do this the right way, you're going to be in trouble, and I can see it now. Here's what's going to happen. Your ship destroyed, your men destroyed as well, and even if you escape, you'll come home late and come home a broken man. All shipmates lost, alone in a stranger ship, and you will find a world of pain at home, crude, arrogant men devouring all your goods, courting your noble wife, offering gifts to win her. No doubt you will pay them back in blood when you come home. All right, so he's telling him all of this is going to happen. And so, since we began in the middle of things and we're going back and now Odysseus is filling us in on everything, it's interesting because we see that what Alcinous is telling him here, a lot of that has happened. So what can we expect? That's the way it's going to happen as we play out once we leave here and are moving through in real time. All right. And also he's finding out there are suitors in my home. All right. Good to know, I guess. I'm going to go home to some hostile characters who don't necessarily want what's best for me, because what's best for me is for me to return, and if I return, they're out of luck. But once you've killed those suitors in your halls, it says, go forth once more you must, carry your well-planed oar until you come to a race of people who know nothing of the sea, whose food is never seasoned with salt, strangers all to ships with their crimson prows and long slim oars. So basically, take your oar and go inland so far as to where somebody looks and goes, what is that? What do you have there? Okay, because that will mean that they have absolutely no idea. They're not a seafaring people. About line, let's say 154, it says, and alas, your own death will steal upon you, a gentle, painless death. Far from the sea it comes to take you down, because he's made that travel. The light in my room just went out. Far from the sea it comes to take you down, borne down with the years in ripe old age, with all your people there in blessed peace around you. All right, the light goes off every once in a while because it's a energy-saving thing. But let me take care of that real quick. So after he gets this information, he is able then to travel. Not travel, but speak to his mom. All right. As you can see there on, let's say, line 177 on page 254, it says, oh, my son, what brings you down to the world of death and darkness? You are still alive. It's hard for the living to catch a glimpse of this. All right. It's hard for the living, but I'm not just any ordinary living person. I'm Odysseus. That's kind of a message. He's also, that pride aspect that is a big part of Odysseus is coming into play here for him to say something like this. I'm special. That's why I'm here. Now we find out, he asked, Mom, you were still alive when I left. What happens? All right. This is on page 256, about the third line. It says, no, it was my longing for you, my shining Odysseus, you and your quickness, you and your gentle ways that tore away my life that had been sweet. She died because she was grieving so much for the death of her son, Odysseus. And I, my mind in turmoil, how I longed to embrace my mother's spirit, dead as she was. And here we have this famous thing that was in the Iliad. It's here, and it also appears in the Aeneid, this writing structure. 3 times I rushed toward her, despite desperate to hold her. 3 times she fluttered through my fingers, sifting away like a shadow, dissolving like a dream. And each time the grief cut to the heart, sharper, yes, and I cried out to her, words winging into the darkness. 3 times I tried to embrace her, 3 times it didn't work. We know that's something that we've seen and talked about before. So now Odysseus is going to come across 14 very important women. And he kind of lists them in quick succession. And it's interesting because he mentions them because these are women, a lot of them had offspring with gods. They have very important, they're sons. Okay, so it's almost like the women are important through who they slept with and who the sons that they bore as a result of that. Okay, so it's through that these women have some sort of fame. The first one is on page 257. Tyro, born of kings, who said her father was that great lord Salomonius, said that she was the wife of Cretheus, Alias's son. And once she fell in love with the river god Enipeus, far the clearest river flowing across the earth, and so she'd haunt Enipeus's glinting streams till taking his shape one day, the god who girds the earth and makes it tremble, bedded her where the swirling rivers rushes to sea, and a surging wave reared up as a high mountain, dark, arching over to hide the god and mortal girl together. All right, down a little, and after Tyro, this is at the very bottom of that page, I saw Aesopus's daughter, Antiope. Proud, she spent a night in the arms of Zeus himself. All right, that makes her famous. And bore the god twins, Amphion and Zethus, the first to build the footings of 7-gated Thebes, her bastion too, for lacking ramparts, none could live in a place so vast, so open, so strong, as both men were. All right, and I saw Alcmena next, Amphitrion's wife, who slept in the clasp of Zeus and merged in love and brought forth Heracles, a.k.a. Hercules, rugged will and lion heart. And I saw Megara, too, magnanimous Creon's daughter, who sent the stalwart Heracles, the hero, never daunted. And I saw the mother of Oedipus, all right, What a monstrous thing she did. In all innocence, she married her own son, who killed his father, then married her. All right, Oedipus complex. Look at that particular story if you're not already assigned to read that or have not already been assigned to read that in, let's say, your lower grades. I saw Chloris, the one whom Neleus wooed and who won with a hoard of splendid gifts, so dazzled by her beauty years ago, the youngest daughter of Iasus, Iasus' son Amphion, the great Minian king who ruled Orchomenus once. She was the queen in Pylos. She bore him shining sons, Nestor and Chromius, Periclymenes, two good prince. So it's all, who did the woman marry or sleep with, and who were the sons, often twins if you're noticing, that were the offspring. It's like kind of through that the woman gains fame. All right. Next page, 259. And I saw Leda next, Tyndareus' wife, who bore the king two sons, intrepid twins, Castor, breaker of horses, and the hardy boxer, Polydeuces, both buried now in the life-giving earth, though still alive. And then a few lines down from that, I saw Iphimedia next, Alias' wife, who claims she lay in the sea lord's loving waves and gave the god two sons, but they did not live long. Otis, staunch as a god, and far-famed Ephialtes, they were the tallest men in the fertile earth has born, and handsomest too by far, aside from renowned Orion. Toward the bottom of the page, Phaedra and Procris too I saw, and lovely Adriane, daughter of Minos, that harsh king. One day Theseus tried to spirit her off from Crete to Athens' sacred heights, but he got no joy from her. Artemis killed her first on wave-washed Dia's shores, accused by Dionysus. And I saw Clymene, Mera, and loathsome Eriphyle, bribed with a golden necklace to lure her lawful husband to his death. Now, this is part of the story. Odysseus is telling, I saw this person. I'm name dropping. All right. And now it says, in his story, he paused. Like, I want you all to take this in, what I have just told you. It says, they all fell silent, hushed, his story holding them spellbound down the shadowed halls till the white-armed queen, Arete, suddenly burst out. Phaeacians, how does this man impress you now? His looks, his build, the balanced mind inside him. The stranger is my guest. Interesting, because he had to appease her, right? That was the whole thing. Now, he's my guest. But each of you princes shares the honor here. So let's not be too hasty to send him on his way. Don't scrimp on his gifts. All right. And then, they begin to talk amongst themselves. And the king, Alcinous here, is very fond still of Odysseus. And you'll see here on page 261 about, let's see, line 410. Ah, Odysseus, one look at you and we know that you are no one who would cheat us. No fraud. Okay? Of course, we know Odysseus might be a fraud if it works in his favor, right? He's kind of got that way where he will maneuver the way he needs to maneuver and have it work out however he feels it's best to work out. But it goes on to finish that last four lines of that section. It says, keep telling us your adventures. They are wonderful. I could hold out here till dawn's first light if only you could bear here in our halls to tell the tale of all the pains you suffered. All right? I'm loving this story. So he goes on and continues to tell his story, and he meets, while he's down there in the underworld, he meets Agamemnon. He had no idea that Agamemnon was dead. In the same way, he had no idea that his mom was dead. Because when Agamemnon left, he was still alive. When he left Troy, he was still alive. He's no longer alive now, and he runs into him and says, "Famous Atrides, lord of men, Agamemnon, what fatal stroke of destiny brought you down? Wrecked in the ships when the Lord Poseidon roused some punishing blast of storm winds, gust on gust? Or did ranks of enemies mow you down on land as you tried to raid and cut off herds and flocks, or fought to win their city and take their women?" Remember, that's kind of Agamemnon and Achilles fighting over women from the very, very first scenes of the Iliad. He's still talking about that here in Book 11 of the Odyssey. All right. Well, he talks about his wife, Agamemnon, because remember, his wife killed him when he returned. His wife conspired and killed him. It says, "Aegisthus hatched my doom and my destruction. He killed me with my own accursed wife." Now, because of this, Agamemnon is going to say some pretty rough things about women. It's his wife double-crossed him. And because his wife double-crossed him, he wants to curse all womankind forever. Watch. "He invited me to his palace. He sent me down to feast, then cut me down as a man cuts down some ox at the trough." Very similar. There are some people who are eating right now at Odysseus' house who have something maybe in store for them. Very similar, kind of hints of what's to come. "So I died a wretched, ignominious death, and round me all my comrades killed, no mercy, one after another, just like white-tusked boars, butchered in some rich lord of power's halls for a wedding." Skipping a little bit, it says, "You in your day have witnessed such hundreds slaughtered, killed in single combat, or killed in pitched battle, true. But if you'd laid eyes on this, it would have wrenched your heart how we sprawled by the mixing bowl and loaded tables there throughout the palace, the whole floor awash with blood. But the death cry of Cassandra, Priam's daughter, the most pitiful thing I heard." Now, he doesn't bring up the fact that he killed his own daughter, okay, Iphigenia, all right? But he's, focusing all his blame of his death right now. Even on line 481, refers to his wife as a whore. That second section, though, says, "So there's nothing more deadly, bestial, than a woman set on works like these. What a monstrous thing she plotted, slaughtered her own lawful husband. Why, I expected at least some welcome home from all my children, all my household slaves, when I came sailing back again. But she, the queen, hell-bent on outrage, bathes in shame not only herself, but the whole breed of womankind." "So he declared, and I cried out," this is the next section, "How terrible! Zeus, from the very start, the Thunder King, has hated the race of Atreus with a vengeance. His truest weapon, women's twisted wiles." All right? Using women against the men. Even though it's the women who, women characters that helped Odysseus get to where he is right now and help push Telemachus on to find out any information about Odysseus to begin with. And it's Penelope who's holding everything together in Ithaca and not betraying Odysseus. Whatever. "What armies of us died for the sake of Helen? Clytemnestra schemed your death while you were worlds away." "True, true," Agamemnon's ghost kept pressing on. "So even your own wife, never indulge her too far. Never reveal the whole truth, whatever you may know. Just tell her a part of it. Be sure to hide the rest. Not that you, Odysseus, will be murdered by your wife. She's much too steady. Her feelings run too deep." All right, so after we get to hear, Agamemnon's misogynist screed about, all womankind for generations to come, we also see Achilles. Remember, he died in the Iliad, and we see Ajax too. Now, you remember these are two great people, but you remember there was all the armor that Hephaestus made for Achilles. and that great shield that Achilles had that had the world depicted on it. Well, when Achilles died, who's going to take his armor? And it was meant, and it did go to Odysseus. And Ajax and he had some struggles about that. And so here, Ajax, we see, is still holding a grudge against Odysseus about not getting the armor of Achilles after Achilles died. And literally in this, Ajax ghosts Odysseus. All right? So, Achilles, at the very bottom of page 264, says, "Royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, man of tactics, reckless friend, what's next? What greater feat can that cunning head contrive? What daring brought you down to the house of death, where the senseless, burnt-out wraiths of mortals make their home?" All right? He says a couple lines after, I had to consult Tiresias, driven here by hopes he would help me journey home to rocky Ithaca. Never yet have I heard Achaia, never once set foot on native ground. My life is endless trouble. But he says to Achilles this. This is very important. Not necessarily what he says, but what Achilles says in response to this. He says, but you, Achilles, there's not a man in the world more blessed than you. There never has been, never will be one. Time was when you were alive, we Argives honored you as a god. And now down here I see you lord it over all the dead and all your power. So grieve no more at dying, great Achilles. Like, you've achieved fame in the realm of the living and in the realm of the dead. You are amazing no matter what phase of life you are in. And it reminds me of, there's a poem, if you want to check it out, called To an Athlete Dying Young, one of my favorite poems by the poet A.E. Housman. And so the thing about this particular poem is, the athlete is a young man who's a runner, and he wins the race. And he wins the race for the town, and everybody cheers, but he dies young. And the idea is the speaker of the poem goes on to suggest that he was smart to die when he did as a young person, because he's never going to see his record cut. He's never going to, be a washed up has-been or anything like that. He died at the peak, so he's always going to be a champion for them. He's always going to be the winner. And then the idea is, at the very end of the poem, he sees that all of the other dead now are flocking around this champion because he's a champion in the afterworld or afterlife or whatever you want to say as well. So, so on earth, even as it is in heaven, he's still the same type of thing. And that's kind of what Odysseus is getting at here whenever he is referring to or talking to Achilles. But Achilles, if you look about a couple lines after that, he says, by God, this is Achilles talking, by God, I would rather slave on earth for another man, some dirt poor tenant farmer who scrapes to keep alive, than rule down here over the breathless dead. So that is pretty significant. Achilles, the greatest warrior ever, would rather be a nobody and still be alive in some remote place that no one has ever heard of. I would rather do that than be the king here in the realm of the dead. That says a lot. And that says something too. What do you say in the Greeks? What could they possibly say if they are thinking that way to continue their warrior-like, soldier mentality? I mean, for the greatest of all time to say that, that is something that is powerful, all right? So it says on page 267, off he went, loping with long strides. So he's happy. Achilles is happy to hear that things are going well on earth for his family, all right? But it is interesting to think about this, because essentially what Achilles is saying is all these things that we do for fame, all these things that we do to be noticed, to achieve, is only significant here on earth. It doesn't matter anywhere else. When you're dead, you're dead. Your fate is what it is. So you, like, storing up medals of honor and being, great or whatever, that only matters here. And that's it. All right. He goes on to talk about some other people that he sees Odysseus does. This is on page 268, the first break there. It says, I saw Minos there, illustrious son of Zeus, firmly enthroned, holding his golden scepter, judging all the dead. Next one, it says, I next caught sight of Orion, the huge hunter, rounding up the fields, on and on and on. Then I saw Tydeus II, son of the mighty goddess Earth, sprawling there on the ground, spread over the 9 acres, 2 vultures hunched. And then we see this one, Tantalus. This is the one I really want to bring up because Tantalus was somebody who, not everybody is punished in the afterworld in the Greeks, and not everyone was punished in the afterworld in the Jewish tradition of the Old Testament. But some people had a tougher time than others. Tantalus is one. Tantalus was somebody who was confined to standing in a river with the water about waist deep, and every time he would bend down to get a drink of water, the water would go down so he couldn't get to it. He would look up and see the pomegranate and be hungry and want to grab the pomegranate. Once he would reach up for the pomegranate, it would rise just out of his... So it was everything he ever wanted was always just out of reach. And that's where we get the word tantalize. The things that we feel are tantalizing are those things that we want, that we long for, that are just out of our reach. Then the famous Sisyphus here, who's for eternity, the thing for him was that he had to set a boulder up on top of a mountain. But of course he would roll the boulder up to the top of the mountain, and just as soon as he would get it to set it there, it would roll down the other side. So he had to go back down and get it. So he's constantly rolling this boulder up and down. You can see that on page 269. And then he sees Heracles, aka Hercules, his ghost, this is on line 690. The man himself delights in the grand feast, the deathless gods on high, wed to Hebe, famed for her lithe, alluring ankles. The daughter of mighty Zeus and Hera, shod in gold, around him cries of the dead ring out like cries of birds. The last, I'd say, 7 lines of this, it says, Heracles knew me at once, at first glance, and hailed me with winging burst of pity. Royal son of Laertes Odysseus, famed for exploits, luckless man, you too? Braving out fate as harsh as the fate I bore, alive in the light of day? Son of Zeus that I was, my torments never ended. Forced to slave for a man, not half the man I was. He saddled me with the worst heartbreaking labors. Why, he sent me down here once to retrieve the hound that guards the dead. No harder task for me, he thought. But I dragged the great beast up from the underworld to earth, and Hermes and gleaming-eyed Athena blazed the way. Of course he did. Hercules, all right? And we're going to finish off with this. It says, hoping that the others might still come, shades of famous hero, men who died in the old days and ghosts of an even older age, I long to see. Theseus and Pirithous, the gods' own radiant sons. Before I could, the dead came surging around me. Hordes of them, just being dead people, spirits. Thousands raising unearthly cries and blanching terror gripped me. Panicked now that Queen Persephone might send up from death some monstrous head, some Gorgon's staring face. Gorgons, Medusa was a Gorgon, the snakes for hair turning people to stone, all right? I rushed back to my ship, commanded all hands to take to the decks, and cast off cables quickly. They swung aboard at once. They sat to the oars in ranks, and a strong tide of the ocean river swept her downstream, sped by our rowing first, then by a fresh, fair wind. All right, so yes, this is a longer video than usual, but this is so much, and I did not even remotely do it justice. It's a very important book, but now Odysseus knows what's in store for him. Odysseus knows what to expect. Odysseus, the tactician, can now plan for what's to come. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. It's more than enough, I'm sure. But thank you for bearing through this, and I hope you will stay with it, and I hope you will read Book 12, annotate Book 12, have your own original thoughts for Book 12, and then I will see you here, and I will give you my thoughts on Book 12. But until then, and as always, happy reading.